Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to show you how you can find the row with the largest sum from a two-dimensional array. So in this video we're doing some 2D array processing. We're going to loop through each row in the array, and then for each row we're going to add up all of the elements in that row. And as we're going to keep track of which row contains the largest sum of values. At the end of the program we're going to print out what this index was and what the actual sum was. So over in Eclipse, I've created a new project called largest sum and also a new class called largest sum. And I got Eclipse to generate a main method for us. So let's just maximize this. Now, for now, we're going to declare a two-dimensional array that stores ints. So two sets of square brackets, and we're going to call this matrix. And I don't know, let's make this new int, and let's make this a, say, 10 by 10 array. So it's a square array that each row and column contains 10 elements. So how do we go about doing this? Well, the first thing we're going to do is declare some variables that are going to keep track of our best so far. So we're going to have int max row, and we'll initialize this to 0, and int index of max row. And this will also be equal to 0. So these are going to store, max row is going to store the current largest sum that we've seen so far, and index of max row is going to store the index into the array where this occurred. So the first thing we're going to do is have a for loop that loops through the first row, and we're just going to store some values into here that represents the first row. This makes sense because we can store the max sum of the first row, and then we compare the rest of the array with what we originally had. So we're going to do this with a for loop. Int column equals 0. So this is going to be our loop variable, column. And we're going to loop as long as column is less than matrix at index 0 dot length. So, oops, that should say length. So we're looping over each element in the first row of the array. So we're looping through each column. And column plus plus as we go through the loop. So all we're going to do here is take max row and add onto it whatever a value exists in this column that we're up to. So matrix at row 0 at column, whatever column happens to be. So we're just adding this on. Note that this also handles negative numbers nicely. The plus equals sign and a negative number, kind of the same as subtraction. Okay, so now that we've done that, we have some values in here that are from our first, or some values in here which represents the sum of the first row. So now we're going to loop through the rest of them and compare that. So we're going to have another loop here for int row equals 1. We're starting from 1 because we've already handled row at 0. Row less than matrix dot length. So we're looping over each row, and then row plus plus. And we're going to have a variable declared inside this for loop called int total of this row. And this is going to be set to 0. So you can guess what this is going to store. It's going to store the total for the current row that we're processing so far. Now, the next thing we're going to have is an inner for loop that's going to loop over columns. So for int column equals 0, column is less than, now this is matrix at row dot length. So the number of columns in the current row that we're processing, and then column plus plus as we go through the loop. Now inside here we're going to add on the value at this row and column to this variable here. So total of this row plus equals matrix at row and column. So the current row and column, we're just adding on to the total of this row. Now what we're going to have is an if. So if the current total that we have is greater than what we previously saw for the whatever row came before that, we're going to update these values. So if total of this row is greater than max row, well, then we're going to update max row. Total of this row. And we're also going to update the index to whatever the current row is. So index of max row equals row. And that's really all there is to this loop. So at this point, we've looped through every single row, because we did the first one here at row 0. So we started from row one, and looped through all the others, and looped through all the columns of each row. So now, what these variables will store is the actual max values, the ones that we wanted to find. So what we're going to have here is, we're going to print this out. System.out.println row. Now we're going to do some string concatenation, index of max row. Plus, now I might just go down onto a new line here to make this a bit easier to see. Actually, I'll do it like that. Has the maximum sum of max row. And this bit here, is how we find out the row with the maximum sum in a two-dimensional array. So really quickly, why don't we test this? So what we're going to do is I'm going to copy this for loop, well, this set of for loops, and I'm going to change this to 0. And I'm going to get rid of this variable. And then inside the inner loop, all I'm going to do is fill this with a random number between, I don't know, 1 and 10. So matrix at row column equals math.random multiplied by 10, and we'll typecast this to an int. So we're generating a random number between 0 and 9 and adding this to here. Now what I might do, just to speed things up a bit, is print this value out. So actually, we only want print. And what we're going to print is matrix at row column, and append that with a space. And then at the end of each row, so this outer loop, we'll have a system.out.println, just empty one. So we're going to print out each row on a new line. The reason for this is so we can see what the array is. So I just saved that. Let's try and run this now. So run as Java application. So what do we get here? Well, you can see here, oops, that it automatically generated filled our array with values. That was this first loop here. We're just setting each row and column to a random number. Now, row 1 has the maximum sum of 57. So that's what our algorithm did here. It found out the maximum row, the row with the maximum sum. And it said that it was row 1. Now remember, the indexes started counting from 0, which means it was this one here. So if we added that up, we'd get 57, which is the maximum value. So with that, that's really all there is to it when it comes to finding the largest sum in an array. In a row, an array. So we had to use two for loops. We had an outer loop that iterated over the rows, and an inner loop that iterated over values or columns inside that row. And we used variables that were declared outside of the for loop to keep track of the current largest sum. So that's kind of important that we declared these values outside the loops. But with that, that's it for this video. Thanks a lot.